recently, I got to thinking about the Shrek franchise a little bit, more specifically about the character of Puss in Boots and his arc throughout the franchise. Because honestly, and this is a really nitpicky sort of take on things, I don't think his arc really makes much sense when you really start to boil it down. Okay, so Puss makes his debut in the film Shrek 2, which for one, instant classic. But yeah, he debuts in that film. Initially, he starts off as an antagonistic character. He's a hired gun. Well, a hired sword. A hitman employed by the king to kill Shrek to clear a path for Prince Charming to marry Fiona and claim the kingdom of Far, Far Away like the fairy godmother wants him to. Of course, he loses to Shrek and Donkey and then joins them on their quest, providing a new form of comic relief and combining sword skills, acrobatics, and cutesy eyes to deadly effect. And honestly, his debut alone cemented his legendary status in Shrek canon. And he continued this supporting sort of role for the third film, Shrek the Third, as one part of the trio that would soon form. He kind of replaced Fiona in prominence, before finishing up with Shrek Forever After. And there, well, once again, he was just another part of the crew. But he remained one of the best parts of all the films he was in. It was a ridiculous presence, arrogant and exciting, a little bit flamboyant, charismatic, hilarious, and he established himself as a fan favourite. And this continued into the most recent installment of the saga, both in terms of release dates and also chronological timeline. And of course, we're talking about Puss in Boots 2, The Last Wish. It was a massive hit that brought the character, and the franchise as well, back from the dead after years and years away, and served to really wrap up the arc that we'd seen building since he debuted on screen. Like I said earlier, when we're first introduced to the character, he was a villain. He kills for money. He doesn't care about Shrek at all. And he'd see him dead in a heartbeat to try and make a quick buck. Only through a twist of fate and a furball is his quest halted in that regard. And thus he finds his life being spared by Shrek, which in turn makes him feel obliged to fulfill a life debt. To stick with Shrek until he saved his life and repaid him. And he's pretty much fulfilled this promise by the end of the film, when he holds off the guards on the way to save Fiona with Shrek and the boys. And yet, he sticks with them, because he's come to change over the course of the film, because they've become his friends. And so, after this movie, he just gets more and more comfortable with this new way of life, moving away from the role of the dashing rogue to a more living on the edge sort of daredevil type of character, embracing his celebrity lifestyle. And that's really the character that we see at the beginning of The Last Wish. Somebody that doesn't really think or care about the consequences of his actions. He just lives life to the fullest, doing whatever he wants, doing whatever takes his passing fancy. Until, of course, this all leads to crushing consequences as Death himself decides to hunt him down to finish him off for good. All for the crime of taking life for granted and wasting his 9 lives in ridiculous fashion. And of course, over the course of that film, he gets his life together, and he earns the respect of Death as he accepts that he's in his final life, and that's okay. And thus, by the end, that arrogant sheen kind of gets rubbed off his character, and he's restored to this new level of glory. He's now the swashbuckling hero. He's new and improved, and is heading back to Far, Far Away for this version of the character to appear in a future Shrek film. Exciting times all round. I mean, if you asked me 10 years ago if I was going to be excited about the prospect of a Shrek soft reboot, I would have laughed in your face and ranted about how the latest Shrek films couldn't ever live up to the splendor of the original two. That while Shrek Forever After was, okay, I guess, that Shrek the Third really sucked, and the franchise should stay gone simply because it had the potential to be that terrible. Yeah, that's right, I was that cool. But yeah, I kind of think this video is starting to get away from me. Back on topic. Like I said, Puss in Boots was really an interesting character, who across his appearances from Shrek 2 to Puss in Boots The Last Wish, had a really concise and interesting arc that made sense and flowed well both within and between the individual movies. But you may have noticed, I haven't mentioned one pretty key film in Shrek canon. The first of the spin-off films, the original Puss in Boots, released in 2011. Once again, this is a classic film, and serves as a prequel to all of the Shrek franchise, I'm pretty sure. Set before his appearance in Shrek 2, it's meant to chronicle Puss's younger days when he was a valiant adventurer. And honestly, for me, this movie is deeply underrated. Like, seriously, it's good. And it doesn't get talked about nearly enough, but that being said, it does pose a little bit of a problem for me, because it kind of throws the whole character arc out the window. And I'd actually forgotten it does that until I watched it again recently. Whilst it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, overanalyzing and nitpicking are some of the finer things in life, and so I'm going to do so. As a refresher, the story of Puss in Boots is this. He's found as a little kitten, alone and abandoned, and is subsequently raised at an orphanage alongside his friend Humpty Dumpty. They bond over their shared dreams, although when they grow up, they go down different paths. Puss becomes a bit of a local hero, and Humpty becomes a bit of a scoundrel, a rogue, a thief, a con man. And this all culminates in him tricking Puss into helping him rob a bank, which makes Puss an outlaw, and sends Humpty to prison. And so this sort of places Puss into that morally grey zone that he was in at the start of Shrek 2. Whilst he didn't want to rob the bank, he did abandon his friend. And so it does make sense so far, but the only real problem I have with this is that the whole film's set before Shrek 2, and he doesn't stay this way. He doesn't stay as an outlaw, or at least he doesn't have an outlaw personality. He becomes good again almost instantly. And in fact, I think the film makes it very clear he was never a bad person at all. He was simply forced into a life of crime because of his treacherous foster brother, which already makes me a little bit confused, but we'll continue. And yes, Puss then rejoins Humpty many years later, and seeks to join him and Kitty Softpaws in stealing magic beans from Jack and Jill, and then using these magic beans to grow a beanstalk and steal the magic golden eggs, which leads in turn to stealing the golden goose, which leads to Puss being betrayed and then inevitably saving the town from the giant goose, proving that whilst he is still being forced to be an outlaw and a rogue, that he's also a very good kitty who cares about others and is a true hero. So really, he's just a good person at the end of the day. It's only the police that want to get him, and this kind of throws me off, because this isn't the character you meet when he first arrives on the scene during Shrek 2, despite these appearances being set one after the other. Whilst, yeah, he is still technically a criminal, at the same time, Puss is meant to be a good person, according to the first film, and so the idea of him taking money in an obviously sketchy inn frequented by scoundrels and villains to assassinate somebody seems like it goes completely against everything his character stands for as of the end of Puss in Boots 1. He makes his mama proud, he saves the entire town, even though they all hate him and wanted to throw him in prison and probably execute him. And so for him to suddenly become a hitman for hire, to me doesn't make sense. And don't get me wrong, I like his arc from Shrek 2 to The Last Wish, and it all works in that order. But if you add on the original Puss in Boots film, whilst it clearly isn't the end of the world or anything like that, after all, he's just the protagonist of a comedy animation franchise, it's not like we're dealing with the world's nuclear codes, it still kind of damages the arc, because it doesn't make narrative sense. They've taken Puss from the end of Shrek 2 and beyond, that personality, and they slap that version of the character into the prequel. But they in turn forget that his personality shouldn't even be like that at this stage of the timeline. Because as we see in Shrek 2, he starts off trying to kill somebody. And so yeah, whilst I love the film, Puss in Boots 1 just doesn't really fit in with the rest of the Shrekverse. Yeah, he probably wants to help clear his name, but murdering somebody seems to be a step in the wrong direction. So it's all just very confusing for me. I mean, maybe you can justify it as Puss thinking killing an evil ogre is fine. Maybe the king framed it that way. Didn't look like it though. I feel like there was probably some details, and I feel like news would have spread that the king had a son-in-law that was an ogre. But regardless, I just don't think it makes any sense for the character. And so I kind of do want some sort of proper explanation. Make another prequel. Explain how he gets to this point. It doesn't kill his arc, but it does feel like a massive plot hole for me. And so yeah, complaint over. And nothing really much else to say here other than these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of this whole thing? Do you think I'm just making a big deal out of nothing? Or do you think I have a point? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and let me know.